Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel, wherever you are in the world, and so much love to each and every one of you. How are you doing? I do hope you're doing remarkably well. I'm doing great, thank you very much. And we're on part 3 of our story tonight, which is very, very exciting, because we've learnt that Fiona Bonrennan, she has just been kicked out by her husband out of the house. Her husband of 30 long years of marriage, who tells her that she's fat and she's ugly and she's stupid, and he's so unkind and cruel to her, and she doesn't know what she's going to do because she realises that she certainly does not want to stay in her home. So she's got to make a decision. Where is she going to go? And the children also don't want anything to do with their father. They've moved 30 hours away by car to live in Texas. So let's just say this man is not desperately popular. So we're about to find out what Fiona Bonrennan is going to do. And it's going to open up the door for an idiosyncratic Bigfoot encounter. So I can't wait for you to tune in right now because it's a very exciting story. So let's continue with part 3 of our story. I don't actually have a plan, Mr. Riley. My husband told me he wants me gone by the time he gets back from the office tonight, so he can move in bfro into the house. I mean, I've lived there for 30 long years as his wife, and now he's tossing me out like a piece of old trash. He says I need to leave the house forthwith, and I'm not going to get a bean from the divorce settlement. Mr. Riley raised his bushy white eyebrow and smiled. There was a glimmer of satisfaction in his kind blue eyes. He looked moderately amused by this startling revelation. Well, your husband, Fiona, is in for a bit of a rude awakening, I have to say. As his wife, you're entitled to half of everything, and there is not anything he can do about it. In regards to staying at the property, of course, I would advise you to leave at once. You could, of course, stay. But do you really want to remain in a toxic, malignant environment like this, with your husband breathing down your neck and treating you with such a dispassionate disregard? You don't want to be around when he gets home at night, moving this bfro in with him. That would be utterly soul-destroying and gut-wrenching for you, and incredibly humiliating. And you don't want that. You're probably right, Mr. Riley. But where on earth will I go? I can't possibly throw myself on my kids' mercy. They have their own lives in Texas to live. I've been completely dependent on my husband over the years. But the good news is I do have a stash of cash that I've saved, which he knows absolutely nothing about. You see, I kept my cleaning job with you a secret from him, Mr. Riley. I never really knew why. Possibly because he'd forced me to stop cleaning for you. And there's no doubt he's always wanted me to be completely dependent on him, not remotely self-sufficient. Well, don't let him know about your earnings, Fiona. If I know your husband, he'll probably be closing down your joint credit cards, so you won't be able to access them. I know his type all too well, but he won't get away with it. As the law is on your side, he'll have to pay up and give you half of his assets. That is how it usually works. He won't be remotely happy about it, of course, but he hasn't got a choice in the matter. And I personally will make sure I find you a great solicitor to deal with him, so you get exactly what you deserve. I had not thought that he might stop our credit cards, but you're absolutely right. That is exactly what he'd do. The man has no scruples. I wouldn't put it past him to do something so mean like that. I know exactly where you should go, Fiona. In fact, I've got the perfect place for you, said Mr. Riley suddenly. He appeared to be becoming excited, almost as if a bright idea had just dawned on him. Where? I asked, looking at Mr. Riley in confoundment. It might surprise you to learn that I happen to own a beautiful, rather charming cottage in Canada, Fiona, with prepossessing country views. It's quite idyllic. Mind you, I haven't been there for an age, so goodness knows what the place looks like now. I hire a cleaning lady to look after it, to keep it in good nick, and I am just hoping that she does. It's a 4.5-hour drive from here. It's situated close to Ottawa National Park. Regretfully, I've never been back.
Couldn't bring myself to do it somehow. Too many nostalgic memories, I suspect. Gloria put her indelible, elegant signature on the place. It's sumptuously homely, very cosy. You will almost certainly love it there, if I know you. It's a breathtakingly beautiful part of the world, very idyllic. Now why don't you go and live there for a while? Let your hair down. Have a little breather. You can stay there as long as you like. And certainly, if you like it enough, I will be more than delighted to leave it to you in my will, along with a little nest egg that I've been intending to leave you in my will. Because your friendship, Fiona, has meant a great deal to me, more than you will ever know. It's been invaluable, precious, more than members of my own family, that I never get to see from one year to the next. Blood is not always thicker than water, Fiona. You've been like a daughter to me. When someone gives something to your life that brings meaning, purpose, and happiness, it's good to give back to the very person that generously did that for you. So I want to do it for you in your case.
It's awfully kind of you, Mr. Riley, but there's no need. And I can't possibly accept such a kind offer of yours. Besides, who will look after you without me around? If I go and live at your cottage in Canada, who will cook and clean for you?
Don't you worry your pretty little head about me, Fiona. You think far too much about other people. It's time to think about yourself. I'm big and ugly enough to look after myself, I assure you. Besides, I can get Ellie Watkins to help me around the house, to keep up the very good work that you started here. I understand she's very efficient. She cleans some of the houses in the neighbourhood around here. And that woman loves to gossip. So I won't get lonely, that's for sure. Ellie could talk the spines of a porcupine if given the chance. Of course I will miss our conversations, Fiona, most greatly. But that's not to be worried about, because we can connect with each other on Skype regularly and keep in touch that way. And it'll be like you're still living next door to me. I emphatically believe, Fiona, that you need to get some space between you and your husband, Gulliver. I think going to Canada will give you the freedom to find yourself again. Your whole life has been focused on caring for your husband and children. It's about time you focused on yourself for a change. Word of advice, Fiona. You're going to need to leave Gulliver your residential address at the cottage in Canada for all the negotiations between your solicitor and his. But the best thing you can do, Fiona, is to get away. You mark my words, it's the soundest, most circumspect piece of advice that I can possibly give you.
Mr. Riley did not need to persuade me any further. I knew his advice was absolutely sound and made perfect sense. So 4 hours later, I'd packed up my suitcases and driven all the way to Canada, ever grateful to have dual citizenship, as it meant I got across the border relatively seamlessly, with the border guards barely giving me a second glance. Indeed, the irreproachable, unflawed journey had gone so flawlessly, without any hitches along the way. It looked as if it was almost meant to be. Perhaps I was supposed to come to Canada. My GPS gallantly guided me past a ubiquitous amount of pastoral agriculture land, lonesome farmhouses, fields of grazing cows, frolicking horses, silvery ponds of reflectant water, and far too many trees everywhere you looked. All shapes and sizes they were in, too many to count. I knew I was getting close to Mr. Riley's cottage when the farmhouses along the way became more infrequent and scattered. Soon my car was rolling steadily down some undulating, sequestered country roads, with hilly embankments upholstering the sides of the road. They were peppered with verdant grassland. The embankments rolled out like an ancient scroll, stretching out into thick blankets of woods, boasting tall, lofty trees, lush with viridescent foliage. They pirouetted up into the sky like skyscrapers. The congregation of trees was a mixed tangle of quaking aspens, maples, oaks, and jack pine trees, so typically seen in this part of the world. In truth, I felt as if I was in the middle of nowhere, and I was seriously beginning to wonder if I was in fact lost. Finally, my GPS told me to take the next turning to my right, and that I had, in fact, reached my destination. What, I thought, looking rather bemused, but it just can't be. There must be some mistake. The GPS has got it wrong. There is nothing here but trees, and still more trees. I haven't seen a tractor for ages. There is no way Mr. Riley's cottage is around here. I reduced my driving to a tortoise-like crawl. I skimmed the trees for any sign of a clandestine driveway or inlet hidden amongst the trees that was not clearly visible from the road that I might easily miss. Then I hit pay dirt. I noticed a small little opening between the trees that was incredibly narrow, so narrow, in fact, that I almost missed it. Feeling heartily relieved and rather pleased with myself, and of course my gallant efforts, I cautiously turned down this narrow path through the trees, many with branches that reached out to scratch my vehicle, probably because they hadn't been cut back for a very long time. I followed the road in a straight line until it opened up into a huge, rather generous grassy clearing that overlooked a backdrop of plump, bosomous hills, covered in seasonal alpine flowers, christened by a scattering of trees, along with a silvery stream of obstreperous water that battered its way frenziedly through the valley over some prominent sculptural rocks and stones. There, in pride of place overlooking the stream, seated like a grandiose queen on her throne, wearing a glistening white dress that sparkled in the dancing shadows of the late afternoon, was the most perfect-looking white cottage I'd ever seen, nestled on a rocky swell that almost lifted the cottage up on a pedestal. It was so incredibly pretty it took my breath away, and bricks and mortar of any kind had never actually done this to me before. But in this place I felt a sense of belonging. Untamed wild roses seemed to crawl up the roughly white-plastered walls in spectacular showy showers of red and pink blooms. It was almost as if the cottage, which was caught up in the soft fading light of the afternoon sun, was smiling at me, warmly, giving me a friendly welcome, as if it was glad to see me. Wow, I thought, this place is absolutely amazing. I had not expected the cottage to be anywhere near as nice as this. It far exceeded my wildest expectations. Mr. Riley had almost certainly underplayed how delightful a cottage it actually was. "Thank you, Mr. Riley. This place is perfect," I said contentedly, under my breath. "And if you do leave this place to me in your will, I'll promise you this, I'll never leave it." I knew I meant every word of that sincere promise in my heart, as it felt like I'd come home, and I'd never really felt like this about a house before. Certainly my house in Vermont that I'd lived in for over 30 years had never felt like mine. Gulliver was the one who'd left his mark on the place, like a dog lifting up his leg to leave a scent trail, so that any other less dominant scents were expunged and overshadowed. I expect that is what had happened to mine. Slowly but surely I cautiously opened the trunk of my car, my heart now frisky with excitement about the prospect of living in this amazing place. If this cottage was as nice on the inside as it was on the outside, I'd be like a pig wrapped in clover. In a frenzy of eager enthusiasm, I began to bring in my suitcases, containing all my worldly goods, to the front door, where I carefully placed them on a small patio under the shelter of an overhanging green canvas awning that dipped over the front door in a generous arched canopy. I gingerly placed my suitcases one by one on the little patio and promptly returned to the trunk to collect my other luggage, which I began to pile outside the door. I was struck quite sadly how little I had to show for my life. Was this really all there was, that I had to show for 30 long years of marriage? It really was quite pitiful. But then again, material things did not define us, I reminded myself. That was when I saw her. I'm not sure how or why I noticed her, or if indeed it was by design that she wanted me to see her, but I knew that something was watching me from the trees, about 100 yards away from the gurgling stream that weaved its way through the valley. She immediately got my attention. I stood up erect, as straight as a pencil, and surreptitiously scrutinized the entire woodgrove with my eyes. And that was when I saw a movement. A dark pyramid-shaped head mischievously peered at me from behind a rather gnarled-looking maple tree. I saw the flicker of dark eyes, the flash of black, the sizable silhouette of a distinctive Herculean figure, This thing was huge. It looked like a gargantuan human being covered in long flowing licorice-coloured hair. I saw her so fleetingly, so quickly, that for a moment I almost thought I'd imagined it. Was that a Bigfoot, I wondered? In absolute awe. Surely not. I studied the trees again, but the lofty silhouette had gone. So I felt a measure of disappointment. I wanted to take a long, hard look at her. I wasn't scared, but fascinated, and I appreciated that this was indeed a very special moment that I would be unlikely to ever forget for as long as I lived, even if it had been so brief. I presumed the Bigfoot had been curious about a new arrival to the cottage that hadn't entertained a human life for a long while, apart from employing the services of a cleaner who came to the house once in a while. Seconds later I almost jumped out of my skin in astonishment. I was certain I heard a female voice directly in my head saying, "Welcome home! We've been expecting you. I'm glad you've finally come." My first thought was, where did that voice come from? I knew unequivocally this voice was not mine. So who had spoken to me? Was it the dark figure that I believed was a Bigfoot that had been watching me a moment ago? Could she have spoken to me in my head like that? Was that even possible? Surely not. I began to believe that my imagination was in overdrive, and that I had spoken those words to myself. Several months later, I was living in Mr. Riley's cottage, as happy as Paddington Bear would have been with his marmalade sandwiches. I had been thoroughly enjoying every minute of living in this mesmerising place, with its rough textured white walls and sash windows. It had been kept meticulously clean over the years, by the cleaner Mr. Riley had employed. The cottage boasted valuable antiques and classic sumptuous furnishings that were both comfortable and incredibly stylish. Despite the cottage not being lived in for so long, there were no signs of mould anywhere, or mice burrowing into the furniture, or spiders setting up silken webs in the corners of rooms. The views over the stream were quite spectacular, both in the late afternoon and early in the morning, when the sun rose and set, a signature ball of tangerine fire, announcing the beginning and end of each day. I would sit on the wraparound porch and watch the bird life and wild animals that came to the water to drink. And given the cottage was parked in the middle of an unspoiled wilderness, the untamed animals I saw were many, and were very varied, and they were plentiful as well, seemingly not to be afraid of my presence. Sadly, as yet, I had not seen the Bigfoot female again. It was so wonderful to be away from my toxic relationship with Gulliver, and I wondered privately why I had been so fearful of leaving him in the first place. I was like a caged bird that had been released into the wild and was learning to fly again, and it was so good to feel this free and unencumbered. I was now realizing that getting a divorce was the very best thing that had actually happened to me in my entire life, an unlikely blessing that had crowned my life with favour. My children were, of course, my greatest cheerleaders, urging me on all the way, as was Mr. Riley, who was resolutely determined now to leave me the cottage in his will, since I loved it so much. So even though I insisted it was far too generous on his part, inwardly I was going, yes, 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 because I had fallen so in love with the place, and it certainly felt like home to me. I couldn't imagine living anywhere else in the world.
"Well done, Mum. I don't know what to say to you," said my son Ralph. "I'm so incredibly proud of you. I've wanted you to divorce Dad for many years. It's the very best thing you've ever done, the wisest decision you've ever made, one that I know you will never ever regret."
Well, it was not like I had any choice in the matter, Rolf. Your dad spat me out, quite literally, to exchange me for a younger, prettier, slimmer and cleverer model. He's absolutely furious that I'm getting half of everything in the divorce settlement. He's stalling them at every juncture, slowing the process down for reasons I just can't explain. He told the solicitors I don't deserve a bean of his hard-earned money, that I'm a fat, lazy, good-for-nothing slob. I think he told them I'd done sod all during our relationship and should be entitled to absolutely nothing. By all accounts, he's pissed over the whole stinking business, making a song and dance about everything. I'm not sure the solicitors enjoy dealing with him. He's been sending me threatening letters, of course, which I choose to ignore. He's warning me off accepting the money or else kind of thing. You know how your father can release a repertoire of idle threats just to get his way.
That's a joke, Mum. You do deserve half of everything. You did so much for that man, and for us. Dad, he did nothing beyond bringing home his miserable paycheck, and ignoring his entire family, or beating us with that belt of his when he became incredibly mad. How is his relationship going with that Barbara Flores woman, by the way? I'm dying to know. I'd love to be a fly on the wall, see what's going on there. I bet you not everything is rosy in the garden. I wonder if they're still getting married after all this time, or has the woman finally worked out that he's a cad?
Unfortunately, from what I gather, Barbara Flores is still very much in love with your father. She won't hear a bad word said against him. I understand she bought her wedding dress recently, and also the invitations to the wedding. And me and your father aren't even legally divorced yet. Talk about being premature. But that's your father for you, overly eager to get hitched to his perfect mannequin. I understand that the reception desk at Kenner's, where Barbara oversees the switchboard with Heidi Esterhuizen, I understand that reception desk is just covered with a plethora of wedding magazines. Heidi was the woman who warned me about your father's affair with Barbara Flores. She sent me a photograph recently of Barbara's late father. I nearly fainted from shock, let me tell you.
Why would you do that? Asked Rolf incredulously. What's so special about her late father?
Well, I don't know exactly how to tell you this, Rolf, but Barbara Flores's late father is identical to your father. They look like two peas in a pod. You can see that Barbara's father has a genuinely warm smile on his face that meets his eyes, while your father, well, he's grumpy, isn't he? He never smiles at all. But beyond that, they look pretty close to identical. They say everyone has a double, you know.
Ah, that makes an awful lot of sense to me now. It sounds like Barbara Flores is trying to replace her father with our dad, especially as they look uncannily alike. There's a name for women fancying men that look like their fathers, isn't there?
Yes, that's right. It's known as an Oedipus complex, I believe. It's what they call an aggressive attraction, usually to a parental figure of the opposite sex, and often happens in childhood. But yes, I think that Barbara Flores is trying to get her father back through your father, because of the physical likeness. It's extraordinary.
Well, I hope for her sake she realizes our father is nothing like her father before she finally ties the knot with him. Believe me, Mum, she's going to be so miserable in that marriage. No woman deserves that.
I hope you're right, Rolf. But I was possibly as naive and besotted by your father when I was her age too. I don't think that this young woman is going to see sense any time soon. I mean, Heidi works with her in reception and has become her very best friend. And if that girl can't talk her round, then I suspect nobody can. She's going to have to learn from her own mistakes. Look at me. I'm learning from mine. I had to be kicked out of my house by my own husband to realise it was the best thing that had actually happened to me. Sometimes mistakes can be like gifts, even if they're served up rather late in the day.
Well, Mum, all I can say is I'm glad you're happy and that you're making friends in the local town. That is great news, it really is. I can't wait to come and visit you in Canada and to see this idyllic cottage of yours.
I'll hold you to that, son, I said teasingly, closing the call. 3 nights later, a scream on my lips. I awoke suddenly, jerking in the chair, sending the book on my lap flying so that it was airborne for a brief second and went violently crashing to the floor with a loud, booming thud. My trembling fingers began to dig into the plush armrest as I stared at the window, where I was greeted to the vacuous darkness of the outside world, staring right back at me. The living room was doused in the soft ethereal light of the lamp in the far corner of the room, that had thankfully stolen the dark shadows away, so that I could see everything in the dull, murky glow quite clearly. I was absolutely certain someone was at the window, looking in at me, Was I going completely mad? Of course I was. I mean, no one was there. It was probably just a raccoon scratching around outside or something. It was nothing to worry about. I was just being silly. Of course I was. Part of me wished I had the daring necessary to peek out of the window, to see if indeed there was anyone out there, but that would involve getting close and personal with the window pane, and I didn't fancy that. My fear undisputably screamed out, "No!" to me, as if I had that kind of bravery anyway, even though I told myself incessantly that nothing was actually there. I could not bring myself to look. I was cowardly, always had been, and I was intimidated by the darkness, so much so that even getting close to the window to rapidly draw the curtain seemed like a very bad idea. Instead, I scooped myself out of the chair and trudged hurriedly up the creaking staircase towards my bedroom. I always made absolutely sure that I had night lights distributed generously through the entire cottage, as staggering around awkwardly in the darkness, playing blind man's buff on my nocturnal trips to the kitchen and bathroom during the night, was not my idea of fun. My bed, in the far corner of the bedroom, beckoned to me invitingly. It was my safe harbour and retreat. The soft, tempting comforter seduced me, with its come-to-bed allure, and moments later I was lying in my bed, sinking comfortably into the luxurious Egyptian cotton sheets, halfway to heaven. I was quick to drift off to La La Land, without any memory of how I actually got there. One moment I was lying in my bed, staring up at the ceiling, and the next thing I knew, I was sound asleep. All of a sudden I was jolted out of my sleep, like I had been downstairs in the living room moments before. The feeling was jolting and abrupt, almost as if someone had pushed me off a cliff. I sat up in bed with a start, wiping the sleep away from my bleary eyes, and that was when I heard it. I could hear pebbles being flung at my bedroom window. Now I was frightened. Someone was out there. I cautiously tipped over to the bedroom window with a surge of courage. Finally I reached the curtains that billowed slightly in the breeze, as yet more stones were flung against the glass pane, with an urgent pinging sound that I couldn't ignore. I quickly jerked back the curtain, peering out of the window. It was dark out there, but a moonlight broke through the ambiguous veil with an injection of pearly light. I could hear the distant sound of a car engine drifting away. Had I imagined that sound? There shouldn't be any cars on my property at this time of the night, but I was certain I'd heard a vehicle hurtling away at a speed, and that was when I saw her, caught up in the glow of the moonlight. It was the Bigfoot that I'd seen on my first day when I'd arrived at the property, and seeing her made me smile almost at once. I could see her so clearly now. She stood up on two powerful tree-trunk-sized legs. She was tall, lofty, and mighty in size and girth. Her yellow eyes looked like circles of fire that were intently focused on me. She was wildly oscillating her arms madly to get my attention. I knew she was trying to communicate with me in some way. What on earth was going on? What was she trying to tell me? Why did she seem so earnest? I leaned closer to the window pane, pressing my nose against it, and as my eyes met the Bigfoot's from a distance away, a voice was screaming in my head, "Fire! Fire! Fire! Get out of your house!" The Bigfoot was telling me there was a fire in my cottage, but how could that possibly be? I hadn't lit any candles. I was astonished. I hurriedly raced down the staircase, and that was when I realized that a couch in my living room, where I was formerly sitting, and was directly under my bedroom on the ground floor, had been set fully alight. The blazing hot fire was merrily leaping and crackling all over the settee, in bright, horrifying infernos of flames. The flames were quickly gaining height, and I realized that this was because there were wet patches on the walls that smelt of petrol. The fire billowed right up to the ceiling, with outstretched yellow fingers that were not remotely reticent in their demands, and seemed eager to break through the ceiling to reach my bed, so that in moments, had I been there, I would have lightly become a fireball. The discomposing thought rattled my emotions. I considered my dismal fate. Had I not woken up in the nick of time? I could smell the accelerant in the air. It was so strong. I knew this fire was no accident.
I hurriedly dashed to the kitchen and grabbed the fire extinguisher, my heart pounding violently in my chest. I almost thought it would burst out of my skin like a tennis ball banging against a concrete wall. My fight and flight adrenal response marinated my bloodstream with a startling efficiency that I'd never owned before. My movements were swift, agile, and prompt. Before I knew it, the fire from the extinguisher had masterfully cut out the flames with its bountiful discharge of fire retardant, then anaesthetized the flames at once, so that a residual grey smoke plumed out of the scaffolding of the couch, resembling a charred human corpse, and the sides of the wall and the ceiling were completely black. I was hit with the horror that I could have died in this inferno. My throat was burning, it was dry and parched, the smell of hot smoke filling my lungs, so that I could almost barely breathe. I was gasping and spluttering and choking. The heat of the flames had singed my pyjamas that I was wearing. There were holes in the fabric, but luckily I had not got burned or remotely scathed. But a second too late, things could have been completely different. I bolted out of the front door like a rabbit from a burrow, and breathed in gasps of refreshing ice-cold air, falling to my knees as I hit the ground. Tears of relief and gratitude spilled down my cheeks. I tasted the salt on my tongue. I wondered why none of the smoke alarms had gone off in the cottage. I had checked that they'd all had batteries. Why had they enigmatically failed to work? The Bigfoot, on seeing me kneeling on the grass, ran hurriedly towards me, swinging her arms and legs as she moved with a flowing grace. Her former reticent evasiveness from when I first laid eyes on her, hiding behind a tree in the woodgrove, had been extinguished much like the fire. I noticed her bright yellow eyes were dappled with great concern. I spluttered out the words, "Thanks! You saved my life!" The Bigfoot stepped forward and began to smack my back lightly until my coughing subsided and my breathing calmed. I drank in deep gulps of oxygen-rich air, my eyes streaming from the grueling effects of the smoke. The Bigfoot suddenly dropped something at my feet, pointing towards the driveway, and then she said in a language that I did not understand, that translated miraculously itself into my head into English, "Kina kikwa, hila kilo, kila sinaswa." "The bad man came. He's gone now. He set your house alight." I glanced down at the thing that the Bigfoot had dropped at my feet and studied it closely. What was it? It looked strangely familiar. I discovered I was holding a black and mustard leather glove in my hand. It was no ordinary glove. It was a glove from a pair of gloves that I'd brought my husband Gulliver as a birthday gift from a fine glove supplier in Switzerland. The gloves had been personally handcrafted and designed, and this one had been made exclusively for my husband. I had even selected the unique pattern that was one of a kind. What was it doing here on the ground? The Bigfoot answered my curious question, as if reading my mind. "Kila koloni pana, isa kila tolatakwi." A man was here, with murder in his heart. His energy was black, black, very black. "Kila tilato, kisatolobana." I knew when I saw that energy, he wanted to harm you. "Kilatina posashikwa." So I followed him to watch what he was doing. "Dinako, matilatila, kolabata." I saw him make a fire in the house. "He kolopo." He ran away, so I threw stones at your window to get your attention. "Kilani kolopo, isafosha." He dropped this thing, said the Bigfoot, pointing to the glove. With trembling fingers flapping nervously like a dove's wings, I studied the glove, caressing it between my fingers. I knew it belonged to my husband Gulliver, but what on earth was it doing here? It was in disbelief I comprehended the horrifying truth. "Kilatika." "Go well," said the Bigfoot. "Kilani kolo, shikasi, polatinatwa, litoloban." "I'm watching over you. Do not be afraid. I will not let the bad man hurt you." She then nodded at me, gliding away, and I was left to piece the enigmatic puzzle together of what had transpired this night. I knew my husband Gulliver had absolutely no time for me these days. Not that he ever did, of course. Indeed, he seemed to actively despise me. It was a sure certainty he was not remotely happy I was getting half of the assets. Did he really hate me enough to want to obliterate me from the face of the earth, to kill me so savagely, in the grasp of a fire? I mean, he may not have been the nicest man in the entire world, but would he really want to harm me like this? So there we are. That is the end of part 3 of our story. It's getting incredibly exciting, and I'm looking forward to tomorrow night. I don't know about you, but this is heating up big time, and there's still more to hear from the Bigfoot. So before we continue, don't forget to join me tomorrow night. I'm looking forward to seeing you then. Until next time, goodbye and good night.